Christmas, the year I turned 32, I went home. I wasn't expecting anything extravagant, not an expensive gift, not some picture-perfect holiday. I only wanted one thing: to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be loved as a real part of my own family. I had spent my entire life trying to be the good one. I didn't break rules. I didn't drop out. I never gave my parents a reason to worry. I put myself through college, paid off my own student loans, found a job, never once asked my family for a dime. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Brielle, was the center of attention from the moment she was born. She did the exact opposite of me, dropped out of college, dated a guy my parents couldn't stand, got pregnant at 22. But they forgave her. They took care of her. They loved her like she was the only miracle they'd ever been given. And me? I was the one who could take care of herself. The one who didn't need anything, so nobody bothered to give. That night, we gathered in the living room. The Christmas tree sparkled under the lights. Brielle came out beaming. My parents had just handed her the keys to a brand new Audi with a huge red bow across the hood. Everyone clapped, cheered, celebrated. I smiled too, the polite kind of smile you wear so you don't ruin the moment. Then it was my turn. My mother handed me a small package, surprisingly light. I opened it and found a cheap, pale pink ceramic piggy bank. Inside was exactly $1. I looked up at my mother. She smiled gently and said, "This is our contribution to your future house." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Something inside me cracked, quietly, in a way no one else could hear. As if all the years I had worked, endured and grown meant nothing more than a single crumpled dollar and a half-joking remark. I didn't make a scene. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't say a word. That night, after everyone went to bed, I packed my things in silence, walked out of the house I grew up in, and never went back. I wasn't just leaving a home. I was leaving a role. The role of the child who doesn't ask, the sister who sacrifices, the adult who no longer needs love. And I know there are so many people out there just like me, people who've spent their lives doing the right thing, being the rock for everyone else, yet never having anyone to lean on themselves. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've been turned into the one who needs nothing, you are not alone. Stay with me until the end of this video, because the story doesn't stop there. Sometimes, to find where you truly belong, you have to be brave enough to leave the place you once called home. And sometimes, the single dollar you're given is really the start of your freedom. I was always the kid who could take care of herself. That title, which sounded like a compliment, was really the shackle that followed me through my entire childhood and most of my adult life. I was the firstborn in the Harper family. When I was born, my mum was just 24. My dad was juggling 2 jobs. I've been told there wasn't even a camcorder to capture my first moments. My mum would tell me almost casually, "We were broke back then, honey." That was fine. I understood. Kids don't need luxury, just love. But then, Brielle came along. I remember the day she was born. I was 7. They placed that tiny newborn in my arms for a picture. Everyone around me was glowing, as if we'd just been blessed. My mum cried from joy. My dad opened a bottle of wine, the first time I ever saw him do that. And me? I sat still, smiled for the camera, and quietly realized I had just been replaced. From that day on, every photo in the house had Brielle at the center. I became the shadow standing behind her, the shadow who knew how to make her own bed, how not to ask for things, how to give up the best piece of cake, and how to take care of her little sister. If Brielle cried, Mum picked her up. If Brielle forgot her book, I was the one running back to school to get it. If Brielle got sick, I sat by her bed all night so Mum could sleep. I never caused trouble. I never made demands. I thought, if I was good, if I was patient, maybe one day Mum would see me, but that day never came. I was 10, the first time my mum forgot my birthday. Everyone was busy preparing for Brielle's kindergarten fall festival. I didn't remind her. I thought she'd remember later. That night she looked at me in surprise and said, "Was it your birthday today? Oh, honey, I was so busy. I'll bake you a cake tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. I got good grades, always in the top of my class. But when I showed her my report card, she'd just say, "That's nice, honey," and turn away to pour Brielle some milk. Brielle, on the other hand, could scribble a crooked little drawing and Mom would stick it on the fridge, calling her my little creative angel. I grew up believing I was only loved because I never needed anything. I learned not to speak when I was hurt, learned to smile through comparisons, learned not to ask why, because the answer was always, "You're the older sister. You should understand. You're older now. Don't be selfish. Brielle's still young. You should let her have it." So I let her have it. I let her have everything. I gave away my own childhood to keep my parents happy. I gave up my need to be noticed, to be comforted, so another child could have it instead. I never blamed Brielle. My sister was just existing. Everything that fell on me was built by the adults in the room, not the fault of a child who happened to be loved more. But the differences didn't stop there. In high school, I started working at the school library to save for college, partly because I didn't want to rely on my parents, and partly because I already knew not to ask them for much. I remember once I needed 30 to pay the SAT registration fee. I debated for days before working up the courage to ask my mum. She sighed and said it was near the end of the month, so I'd have to wait a week. A few days later, I saw her buy Brielle a frilly princess dress to wear to a friend's birthday party. I didn't say a word. I borrowed the money from a friend, and I swore to myself it would be the last time in my life I ever held out my hand to my mother. Then came college. I filled out my applications on my own. No one walked me through the deadlines. No one reminded me to prepare recommendation letters, essays, or application fees. Everything was Google searches, asking friends, trial and error. When it was Brielle's turn a few years later, all she had to do was mention what major she wanted. And my mum immediately printed a list of schools, found her an SAT tutor, and scheduled campus tours. When she applied, the whole family sat together picking out the perfect photo for her application. I didn't feel jealous. I'd been trained too well for jealousy to take root. I just noted the difference. When I got into college, I didn't throw a party. I knew no one would have the time to come. I started working that summer, library assistant, dishwashing at a diner near campus, sometimes even delivering takeout late at night. I didn't have a choice. Tuition was $2,100 a month, not counting books, food, and rent. Every penny was a fight. I once calculated that my part-time jobs, after taxes, paid me 9 to 38 cents an hour. I knew because I kept an Excel sheet tracking every expense for all 4 years. Meanwhile, Brielle got a brand new MacBook the day she moved into her upscale dorm. Private room, no part-time job. She called home one day to say she wanted to join a summer study program in Italy after her sophomore year. My mum wired her the full tuition and living expenses for 3 months in Europe without hesitation. I know because I accidentally saw the transfer email when I borrowed my mum's laptop. The day I graduated college with honours, I stood alone in the courtyard in my cap and gown. I didn't invite anyone. They were in Hawaii celebrating my dad's 50th birthday. I looked around, saw students being hugged by their parents, families holding flowers and congratulatory signs, laughter and tears everywhere. Me, with a 3.9 GPA, 4 years of complete independence, owing no one a cent. I just stood there quietly, holding my diploma and $27,000 in student debt waiting for me. For years, I told myself maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they were just busy, distracted, or thought I was fine, so I didn't need attention. That was my comfort. But slowly I realized this wasn't random. This was a system where I always carried the heavier load because I was capable. A system where Brielle always got the softer landing because she was sensitive and needed protecting. A system where if I stayed silent, everything stayed peaceful. But if I spoke up, I was jealous, unreasonable, difficult. I had tried speaking up once, just once. After graduation, I called home, not to complain, but just to share. That I'd paid my final semester's tuition by working 2 overnight shifts back to back in 1 week. That I'd been so exhausted I collapsed in the restaurant bathroom. That I felt like I was grinding my youth into dust just to keep my life from falling apart. My mum was silent for a moment, then said, "You shouldn't push yourself like that. If it's too much, just take a break, like your sister. Not everyone's meant for all that studying." I didn't even know how to respond. My sister had dropped out because she couldn't handle taking 3 classes at once. I had taken 6 while working 3 jobs, and I was the one being told I could just stop if it was too hard. I never brought it up again. I understood. I was expected to be strong, to excel, to manage on my own. Not because they were proud of me, but because it meant they didn't have to worry about me. And if I wasn't a burden, then I didn't need love. I started my first job out of college at a small architecture firm. I rented a run-down room in the suburbs, every month choosing between eating well or making my student loan payment in full. I still sent gifts home for every holiday, still called to check in, still played the role of the good daughter. Meanwhile, Brielle stayed home, even after having her first child. My parents renovated the downstairs into a private apartment for her and her boyfriend. They bought her a car, paid for daycare, and called it an investment in our daughter's future. I invested in myself with blood and tears. No one shielded me from reality, from the unfair system I was trapped in. I was both a victim of it and a participant, because I never dared to slam my hands on the table and say, I need to be loved too. I hadn't planned to go home that Christmas. For years, I'd gotten used to spending the holidays alone or with a few co-workers. But when December came, when the streets and shop windows started glowing with lights, a small fragile part of me stirred. That part whispered, "Maybe this year will be different." I told myself maybe my parents had noticed the distance between us. Maybe after all these years they would see me, not just as the daughter who can take care of herself, but as part of the family. A part worth remembering, worth waiting for, worth loving. I spent a whole week choosing gifts for everyone. For Brielle, a beige cashmere scarf, soft and light, something I knew would match her golden hair. For Mum, a set of Japanese ceramic teapots she'd once admired but never bought. For Dad, a classic watch, not expensive but tasteful, something I'd saved months to afford. For my nephew, a set of wooden building blocks, safe enough for him to play without worry. I wrapped each gift in brown craft paper tied with red ribbon. Every bow, every folded corner, neat and precise. I wasn't just wrapping gifts, I was wrapping my last fragile hope. On Christmas Day, I drove home. The house looked the same. White paint, green door, strings of blinking lights along the eaves. The smell of cinnamon and gingerbread drifted from the kitchen into the living room. Dad was deep in conversation with someone, Mum was fussing over the dining table, and Brielle was smiling the way people do when they're sure the world revolves around them. I walked in, hugged everyone, and placed my bag of gifts under the tree. No one asked how I'd been. No one noticed the weight I'd lost. No one saw the dark circles under my eyes after months of overwork. Then came the gift exchange. Like every year, Mum started with Brielle. She opened the biggest package. Inside was a brand new Audi parked outside, a bright red bow on the hood. Cheers and laughter filled the room. Dad handed her the keys, Mum hugged her. The whole family clapped like it was the greatest moment in history. I clapped too. I smiled, the kind of smile I'd perfected over the years, to hide the feeling of being left behind. Then it was my turn. Mum handed me a small package, so light I thought it might be empty. I opened it, a cheap pink ceramic piggy bank. Inside, exactly $1. I looked up at Mum. She smiled and said, "This is our contribution to your future house." There was laughter around me, someone joking, "At this rate, you'll have a house in a few decades." I smiled. But inside, something quietly shattered. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even surprise. It was more like the final nail in a door that had been rotting for years. I realized then all the hope I'd held on to was really just me lying to myself. I still handed out my gifts, still said Merry Christmas like nothing was wrong. I still poured wine, ate cake, and listened to them talk about vacations, shopping trips, and plans for Brielle and her little family. No one mentioned me. No one asked, "What about you?" I realized in their eyes I didn't need anything. Not to be asked about, not to be listened to, not to be included. I was there just enough for them to feel the picture was complete. That night, after everyone was asleep, I packed my things. No sound, no tears, just a heavy, hollow emptiness in my chest. I walked out quietly, locking the door as if I might wake people who had never really seen me. In the backyard, under the old Christmas tree, the same tree where I'd hung my first ornament at 7 years old. The same tree Brielle and I had strung lights on every year, so when guests arrived, they'd say, "The Harper tree looks amazing this year." I sat there, and for the first time in years, I let the tears fall freely. Not because of the cheap gift, not because of the $1, but because I finally saw it. 32 years of sacrifice had meant nothing. I had done everything to hold this family together. I yielded, I carried, I stayed silent to keep the peace. I made myself as easy as possible, believing that if I did everything right, one day they would love me the way I loved them. But that day never came, and it never will. The winter wind blew hard, pine needles drifting down around me. I remember sitting there for a long time, my hand clenched tightly around the ceramic piggy bank, as if holding on to the last piece of evidence that any of it had happened. I pulled out my phone, dialed a number I knew by heart, Tessa Monroe. Tessa had been my friend since freshman year of college. She'd seen it all. The nights I stayed up until dawn finishing projects, the times I collapsed over my desk from exhaustion, the holidays when my family forgot me completely. Tessa never tried to say, "I'm sure they didn't mean it." She just listened. And sometimes that silence was warmer than all the fake comfort in the world. The phone rang once before she picked up. "Danielle, what's going on?" Her voice was sharp with concern. I opened my mouth, but nothing coherent came out, just the sound of my breath catching, that desperate rhythm of someone trying not to fall apart. "Where are you?" she asked quickly. "Home," I rasped, but probably for the last time. There was a pause on the other end. Then Tessa's voice, steady but gentle. "Come to Seattle. Stay with me. You don't have to be there anymore, Danny. You don't have to prove anything to them." That sentence felt like a door opening in a room I'd been locked inside my whole life. I'd never considered leaving for good. I'd always believed that no matter how much it hurt, family was the place you had to return to. But maybe I'd been wrong. Family isn't where you're born. Family is where you are seen. And here, I had never been seen. "I'll come," I whispered. And as soon as I said it, something inside me loosened. I stood up, took one last look around, the peeling paint on the porch, the wooden swing Brielle used to sit on, the bedroom window with its faded curtain. Everything was familiar, but none of it was mine anymore. That night I packed. Not much. Just a few changes of clothes, some documents, my old camera, and the piggy bank. I wanted to take it with me as a reminder, never to step back into the role I used to play. I left no note, sent no message. I knew that if they noticed I was gone, they wouldn't ask why. They would just assume I was fine. They always did. The road from my small town to Seattle stretched long and quiet. The night sky was heavy with clouds, streetlights rare, their glow spilling across the rain-slick pavement. I drove in silence, hands gripping the wheel, my mind drifting through years of memories, forgotten birthdays, dinners where I only listened to them talk about Brielle, the endless chorus of "You're older, you understand." I remembered one winter when I was 15, burning with fever for 2 days. My mum didn't notice. She was too busy preparing for Brielle's piano recital. I made my own tea, my own soup, cleaned up after myself. And when I recovered, I still went to cheer Brielle on. Back then, I thought that was love. Looking back now, it was just endurance, wrapped in the label of good sister. Halfway to Seattle, the hunger and fatigue hit me. I spotted the neon open sign of a small roadside diner. its glow flickering in the early morning mist. I pulled into the lot and stepped inside. The air was warm, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and waffles. There were only a few customers, mostly long-haul drivers. Behind the counter, a woman in her 60s with streaks of gold in her silver hair was polishing a white mug. Her eyes were bright but deep, the kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of human story. "Morning, hun. Sit anywhere you like," she said, her voice carrying the slow, low warmth of the Pacific Northwest. I chose a table by the window. When she came over with the menu, I ordered black coffee and eggs over easy. I hadn't planned on talking, but when she set the coffee in front of me, she looked at me just a moment too long. "You look like you're on your way out of something," she said softly. It wasn't nosy, just an observation. I hesitated. Normally I didn't tell strangers about my life, but her eyes, they didn't pry and they didn't pity. They just felt safe, like I could exist here without performing any role at all. And so, as the warmth of the cup seeped into my hands, I began to talk. Not the whole story, just the important fragments, the childhood of being the self-sufficient one, the gulf between me and Brielle, the birthdays forgotten, the years of holding myself together to prove I was fine. Then this Christmas, the piggy bank, the $1, and the decision to leave. She listened without interrupting. Occasionally she'd nod or press her lips together, more in understanding than sympathy. When I finished, there was a short silence. She set the mug down, leaned on the counter and said, "When I was young, I used to think blood was everything. I put up with a lot because I believed family would always be there. But then I learned something, and I want you to remember it. Blood makes you related. Love and respect make you family." I didn't speak right away. That simple sentence felt like someone had just eased out a rusted nail that had been lodged in my chest for decades. She went on. "People often confuse the two. They think that because you share blood, you're obligated to endure, to overlook, to stay connected. But blood doesn't guarantee love, and love can't exist without respect. Real family is a place you can return to without having to shrink yourself down into a palatable version for someone else." I stared down at the table. Her words lit up every memory, every moment I'd made myself smaller to fit the mold my family had built for me. I realized I'd never been my whole self there. I'd only ever been the sister, the oldest child, the one who's fine. "You know," she said, her voice slower now, "sometimes to find your real family, you have to step out and build it yourself. Find the people who see you as you are, not as they wish you would be." "Did you?" I asked. She smiled, a look that was both gentle and tinged with regret. "Took me half a lifetime. But when I did, I realized all those old wounds didn't get to decide who I was anymore." We sat quietly for a while. I sipped my coffee, feeling warmth spread through my chest. Not from the drink, but from the fact that for the first time in years, someone was telling me what I needed to hear, not what they wanted me to believe. Before I left, she handed me a small box of cookies wrapped in brown paper. "For the road, in case you get hungry. And remember, don't let anyone else define your worth but you." Stepping outside, the cold wind bit at my skin, but inside I felt calmer than I had in years. I knew Norma Field's words would stay with me far longer than any gift ever could. because they weren't just advice. They were confirmation that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't too much, and I wasn't wrong for choosing to leave. As my car rolled back onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The diner's neon open sign grew smaller, then disappeared. But that sentence still rang clear in my mind. Blood makes you related. Love and respect make you family. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was driving towards something, not just away from it. When I reached Seattle, Tessa was already waiting. She hugged me hard. No, what happened? No demands for an explanation. Just an embrace. The kind that told me that here, at least, I wasn't invisible. In those first few days, I slept more than I thought I could. My body, after years of grinding through stress, finally had permission to rest. I ate hot meals. I laughed at stories that had nothing to do with my past. And each morning, I woke up realizing I no longer had to play the role of the strong one. Once I was settled enough in Tessa's spare room, I sent in my request to transfer from the Portland office to the Seattle branch. My boss, used to seeing me take on more than my share, sounded surprised, but I didn't explain. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to justify my choices. 2 weeks later, I was walking into my new office. No one here knew my history. No one saw me through the lens of the one who can handle anything. My co-workers knew me as someone who worked hard, but also someone who could say no when needed. That was so new, I almost didn't know how to react when people actually respected the boundaries I set. With my modest savings, I found a small apartment in Capitol Hill. White walls, big windows overlooking bare winter trees, old hardwood floors that creaked but were clean. There wasn't much furniture, just enough to make it feel like mine. For the first time, I chose everything myself. The color of the sheets, the style of the kitchen table, even where to hang my favorite print. No one offered suggestions. No one said, "It would be better if..." It was Tessa who suggested therapy. At first, I hesitated. I'd always believed therapy was for people who couldn't handle things themselves. And I'd been trained my whole life to believe I wasn't one of them. But one night, it hit me. Strength isn't never needing help. Strength is having the courage to face the wounds you've gotten used to hiding. My therapist, Dr. Klein, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried weight. In her beige upholstered armchair, I began peeling back the layers. I told her about the Christmases I'd been forgotten, the dinners where my name only came up when someone needed something, the constant sense of living on the edge of my own family circle. She didn't rush to fix me. She just asked, "Danielle, who told you your worth only comes from what you sacrifice?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, no one had ever said it out loud. But every action, every choice they'd made, every time I'd been overlooked, it had whispered that message into me for as long as I could remember. Therapy didn't make the hurt vanish, but it helped me see myself more clearly, not through my family's eyes, but through my own. And from there, I began to learn a new skill. Holding my boundaries. I came to understand something. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. And I get to decide who's earned the right to walk through and when to close them to protect myself. I started practicing that with the new connections I'd made in Seattle, a few kind co-workers, a little book club at the cafe down the street, And Margaret, the elderly neighbour with 2 cats, who always invited me over for Sunday tea. None of them knew my family story. And interestingly, they still valued me, listened to me, and welcomed me into their lives without demanding I pay for it in unconditional sacrifice. One Friday night, while arranging books on a new shelf, I noticed an empty spot in the middle and thought of the piggy bank. I'd brought it from my old house, but never gave it a place. I pulled it out from the cabinet. The pink ceramic was scratched, the single dollar inside still exactly as it had been on Christmas night. I set it on the shelf, not as a painful keepsake, but as a reminder. I had left the place that taught me my worth was invisible. Right next to it, I placed a new piggy bank, ocean blue, smooth ceramic without a single mark. And I made a rule. For every week I upheld my boundaries, I'd drop $1 in, not to save for anything, not to plan for the future, just to count, to see how many weeks I'd lived defining my own worth. Week 1, I added $1 when I turned down unreasonable overtime without feeling guilty. Week 2, another $1 for saying no to someone I knew would drain me. Week 3, when I let my mother's call go to voicemail because I wasn't ready to hear words that would shrink me back into a silent child. Each time a bill hit the ceramic, it made a soft sound. Small, but to me, it was the sound of freedom. I knew there'd be hard days ahead, moments when I'd miss home, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. Moments when guilt would creep in for leaving. But now I had new people in my life, people who saw me, heard me, and loved me without expecting me to carry the whole world to deserve it. And I had Seattle, a city that didn't promise to heal me, but gave me the space to heal myself. Every morning when I looked at that blue piggy bank, I knew I was building a different kind of family, one that didn't measure my value by how often I ignored my own needs, but by how fully I was allowed to be myself. I thought a few 100 miles and my silence would be enough for my family to let me go, at least for a while. But I underestimated the pull of codependent ties and their obsession with keeping me in my old role. It started with text messages. At first, they were concerned. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Your sister misses you. Then, quickly, they shifted to accusation. You're selfish for leaving without an explanation. We did everything for you, and this is how you repay us? You're making us ashamed, I read them, then locked my screen. No reply. The phone kept buzzing. Different numbers flashing. My mother, my father, Brielle, even the house phone. They left voicemails, each one layered with that familiar cocktail of guilt and obligation. You're embarrassing me in front of the family. Your sister doesn't understand why you hate her. Family sticks together, Danielle. You can't just cut us off. I sat in my apartment, listening in silence. The old reflex tugged at me, the urge to pick up, to explain, to smooth over their anger, the way I had for 32 years. But this time, I didn't. In therapy, Dr. Klein had taught me something deceptively simple. Feel the emotion, but don't act out the old pattern. I could feel guilt, sadness, anger, even longing, but feelings aren't commands. I no longer had to react instantly just to fix things for them. When the calls went unanswered, they switched to email. Long, dense blocks of text that read like formal indictments. repeating that I was being manipulated by someone, that I was no longer the person they knew, that I was destroying the family. I recognized every word for what it was, a rope meant to pull me back, not with love, but with fear and guilt. And then they showed up. It was a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of work. My new Seattle office was an open space with glass walls overlooking the city. I was focused on a set of architectural drawings when a co-worker leaned in and said quietly, "Danielle, someone's here for you." I turned. Through the glass, I saw my mother, standing tall in a long coat, her face as cold and unreadable as a walking courtroom. Beside her was Brielle, eyes rimmed red but lips pressed tight. My heart pounded. For a split second, I was 16 again, being summoned to the living room for a serious talk. Every old reflex slammed back into me. Step forward, apologize, promise to do better. But I didn't stand. I signaled to the receptionist that I wouldn't be taking visitors. The glass door stayed closed between us, and I saw my mother's brows knit as she murmured something to Brielle. They lingered a few minutes, then turned and walked away. I sat at my desk, hands ice cold. Part of me was trembling from fear, the other part from something new. I had just chosen myself. That night, my phone lit up with messages. "You're ungrateful. I came all the way there and you wouldn't even see me." "Aren't you ashamed? People saw your mother standing outside like a beggar." "You'll regret this when we're gone." I read every word, feeling the sadness, but this time it didn't pull me under. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and asked myself, if I answer, will it be out of love or out of fear of being hated? The answer was clear. I set my phone down. In the weeks that followed, they kept trying to breach the wall, letters in the mail, accidental run-ins through mutual acquaintances, even leaving gifts outside my apartment door. Each time I had to face the voice in my head, the one fed for decades. "They're still your family. You can't ignore them." But I heard another voice now, quieter, newer. Family doesn't get to hurt you just because they share your blood. I kept up my ritual with the blue piggy bank. $1 for every week I held my boundary. Some weeks I added more than one, like the week they showed up at my work, or the week I ignored a string of calls from unknown numbers. Watching the money build wasn't just saving, it was a measurable record of freedom. Dr. Klein told me their reaction wasn't proof I was wrong. It was proof I was breaking the role they depended on. When I stopped being the one who endures, they lost the benefits that role gave them. Resistance was a sign I was doing something right. Slowly, I learned to hear their words, not to believe them, but to understand what sat underneath. When they said, "You're destroying this family," I translated it to, "You're no longer doing what we want." When they said, "You'll regret this," I heard, "We want you back in the role that's convenient for us." Learning to translate those messages was one of the skills that saved me from falling back into the loop. One night, while tidying my bookshelf, I looked at the two piggy banks side by side, the scratched pink one with its $1 and the blue one growing heavier. I realized both were part of my story. One was the symbol of years defined by invisibility, the other proof of every week I'd chosen myself. I didn't know what they'd try next, but now I knew I didn't have to win against them in any argument. I just had to keep living by my own boundaries. And that, to me, was already victory. Then I got a wedding invitation from a distant relative. It was addressed to the Harper family. When I told Tessa about it, she just said, "If you feel ready, maybe this is your chance." I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to decline, avoid the collision, but another part knew that if I kept staying silent, I'd forever be trapped as the one who left. And I was done letting other people write my story for me. I decided to go, not to reconcile, but to speak. Clearly, once and for all. The wedding was in a small coastal town, a few hours' drive from Seattle. I arrived the night before and stayed at a small hotel nearby. The next day, as guests started gathering, I heard my family was staying at the same hotel. The opportunity had come sooner than I'd expected. Early that morning, I sent a message to the family group chat. "Meet in the breakfast room at 8 a.m., family only." No one replied, but at 8 a.m. when I walked in, they were there, my father, my mother, and Brielle. My mother sat straight-backed, her eyes assessing. My father had his arms crossed, jaw set. Brielle glanced at me, a flicker of hesitation in her face. I sat down. No small talk, no pretending this would be pleasant. "I'm going to speak," I began, my voice low but steady. "And this time, I need you to listen until I'm finished." No one said a word. I looked at each of them in turn. For 32 years, I've been in a family where love was given based on convenience. Brielle was cared for in every detail. Tuition, gifts, trips. I got silence. I filed my own college applications, paid my own debt, handled everything alone. And you called it "because you're strong." But the truth is, it was abandonment. My father started to speak, but I raised my hand. "No, let me finish. I've swallowed my silence long enough." I told them about the birthdays they forgot, the times I was sick and no one noticed, the holidays where I was just an audience for other people's joy. I reminded them of that Christmas, the brand new Audi for Brielle, and the piggy bank with $1 for me. I didn't leave out of anger. I left because I finally realized this family has never seen me as a human being with needs and feelings. I was just a supporting character there to make the story about Brielle and my sacrifice look complete. The room was silent. The clinking of cutlery from the next table felt miles away. My mother took a sip of coffee, eyes fixed on her cup. "We didn't realize you felt that way," she said slowly, her voice a little unsteady. I nodded. "I know, but the fact you didn't notice doesn't mean it didn't happen, and my silence didn't mean I was okay." My father exhaled but didn't argue. There was something in his eyes, as if he knew at least part of what I said was true, but wasn't used to admitting it. Brielle was the one to break the quiet. I never thought you felt that way. I just took what was given. I didn't know it was taken from you." I looked at her. "I don't blame you for receiving. I blame your silence when you saw me being left out. Maybe you didn't know as a kid, but when you grew up, you did." Brielle dropped her gaze. "I knew, and I chose to stay quiet, because it was easier." You're right. That admission, simple but heavy, didn't erase the past, but it confirmed I hadn't imagined it. I drew in a breath. I didn't come here to reclaim fairness. I came to set a boundary. I won't go back to the old role. I won't suffer just to keep the peace. If you want me in your lives, you'll have to see me as an equal, not as a convenient shadow." My mother stayed silent. My father looked out the window, but neither of them objected. And I realized, for my family, that silence was the highest level of acknowledgement they could give me in that moment. Breakfast ended without a reunion hug, without a full apology, but I stood up feeling lighter, because for the first time they had listened, really listened, to my story. As everyone left the table, Brielle held me back. I want to do better. I can't promise I'll get it all right, but I'll try." I looked at her and saw a sincerity I'd never seen before. I nodded. "That's all I ask. Try. And be honest." I didn't return to Portland after the wedding. The drive back to Seattle was quiet, but not heavy the way it had been on the way there. On the highway, watching the fog-draped mountains slide past, I realized I had just closed a chapter. Not because all the wounds had healed, but because I'd stopped letting them run my life. I knew that morning's conversation wasn't a miracle. My parents still hesitated, still avoided outright responsibility. But I also knew a seed had been planted, and I had the right to decide whether it grew or withered. A few weeks later, I wrote my parents a letter, short, without detours. In it, I invited them to Seattle, not as tourists, but to sit down and talk as equals. I set the terms plain as a blade. Either respect the real me, or we have no relationship at all. I wrote that line slowly, each word like a brick in the new wall I'd built around myself. No more, "I hope you understand," or "I just want us to get along." This time, there was no room for ambiguity. A week later, I got a text from my mother, "We'll come." Short, no exclamation mark, no emojis. But enough. The day they arrived, Seattle greeted them with a light rain. I chose a small cafe in Capitol Hill, warm, full of natural light, simple wooden tables. Not so private that it would feel like a standoff, but quiet enough that no one could avoid the conversation by looking away. They walked in, my father, my mother, this time without Brielle. I stood, shook my father's hand, gave my mother a brief hug. No lingering embrace fishing for approval like before. I sat down, handed them menus, and began. "I asked you here because I want to be clear. If you want me in your lives, the only condition is respect. Not for the version of me that's convenient for you, but for who I actually am." My mother blinked, setting down her water. "Are you saying we've never respected you?" I held her gaze. "Not never, but most of the time you respected my role, the eldest daughter who endures, not the person I am." My father frowned, but didn't interrupt. Maybe he'd realized by now that cutting me off would be a step backward. I went on. "I'm not asking for love anymore. I used to beg for it by overachieving, enduring, giving up my own needs. But love didn't come. Now I choose to love myself first. If love from family comes, I'll accept it, but I won't trade myself to get it." No one replied right away. The sound of rain tapping on the glass, the faint hum of the espresso machine at the counter. I didn't rush. This silence didn't feel empty. It felt like space I needed to give them so they could actually absorb my words. Finally, my mother said, "You've changed so much." I nodded, yes, and I'm not going back to how things were. My father drew in a deep breath. We may not understand everything, but we'll try. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a denial either. For my family, that was progress. I added, if one day we cross each other's boundaries, I want it said plainly. No circling around, no blame shifting. I'll do the same. Respect isn't always easy, but it's the only foundation we have if we're going to continue. My mother stayed silent, but gave a small nod. We didn't fix everything in that meeting. I didn't expect to. What I wanted and what I got was a new foundation. No more room for insinuations, for cryptic remarks, or for testing phone calls to see if I'd softened. When they left the cafe, I stood on the sidewalk, watching their figures fade into the rain. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel bitter either. Just a strange, quiet calm, like I'd finally set down a stone I'd been carrying on my back for far too long. Back home, I slipped a new dollar bill into the blue piggy bank. This week's dollar wasn't for refusing someone or dodging a phone call. This week, it was for standing in front of them, saying everything, and not taking back a single word. I realized the old Danielle, the girl who sat waiting for a glance of approval, was gone. The woman in that cafe was a new Danielle Harper, someone who doesn't beg for love, doesn't reshape herself to fit someone else's mold, and isn't afraid of being disliked for living authentically. I don't know what the future of this relationship will look like. Maybe we'll get closer. Maybe it will stay at polite distance. But I know one thing. I will never again allow anyone, even family, to define my worth. 1 year since leaving Portland. 1 year since that Christmas night when I learned that sometimes cutting ties is the only way to keep yourself whole. Seattle has become home. Not because it's perfect, the winters are damp, the rain can drag on for weeks, and loneliness still visits sometimes, but because every corner, every cafe, every street I walk carries my own footprint. I'm no longer a guest in someone else's life. I'm the one building the roof over my own head. The little apartment in Capitol Hill is the same. White walls, large windows looking out onto the bare trees. But now it holds the warmth of a life built from my own choices. On the bookshelf, between novels, photographs, and a few keepsakes, the blue piggy bank sits beside the scratched pink one. They're no longer two separate relics from two different stories. They're consecutive chapters, one about being overlooked, one about self-respect. The blue piggy bank is heavy now. Every dollar inside it is a week I kept my boundaries, a week I didn't let someone else define my value, a week I said no when I needed to, even if my heart still raced at the fear of being misunderstood or disliked. Each bill I add feels like signing my own personal declaration. I'm here and I deserve to exist whole. Work at the architecture office in Seattle has become a joy, not a burden. I'm trusted with projects where my voice matters. When I pitch an idea, no one dismisses it just because it's not your place. I've learned that respect isn't a luxury, it's a basic right. And once you've tasted it, you'll never go back to accepting less. My friends here don't need me to strain to be worthy. We meet for dinner, read books together, or just sit in quiet cafes. They don't ask, half accusing, half curious, why did you leave your family? They just know I did what I needed to do to live truthfully, and that's enough. Sometimes my family still reaches out. The conversations are different now. No more guilt trips. No more because we're family wielded like a weapon. They know the terms I set. Either respect the real me or we have no relationship. And I know they won't always understand, but at least they've stopped trying to break that boundary. Once my mother sent me a birthday card. No money, no expensive gift, just a few handwritten lines. I hope you're happy. I'm still learning how. I placed that card next to the blue piggy bank, not because it was an apology, but because it was proof that change, however slow, is possible. On winter nights when the city is wrapped in a thin veil of rain, I sit in the armchair by the window holding the old pink piggy bank in my hands. I tip it, the single dollar inside still tucked neatly as the day I got it. But now it's no longer a symbol of hurt. It's a reminder of where I started and how far I've come. I know now that my worth was never in someone else's approving glance, not my parents, not my relatives, not anyone's. It's in the way I believe in myself, even when no one stands beside me. It's in the small, everyday choices, from saying no to an unreasonable request, to allowing myself to rest without guilt. A year ago, I left home with a broken heart and empty hands. Today, I stand in my own apartment, surrounded by things I chose, paid for, and cared for myself. Not because I've found a perfect family or a life free of hardship, but because I've given myself the greatest gift, the courage to start over. I know there will still be days when I feel weak, times when old memories creep back, whispering that I'm too sensitive, too stubborn, or that I should go back to how things were. But I also know I can sit down, pick up a dollar bill, drop it into the blue piggy bank, and remind myself I've come further than I ever thought I could. And if I had to choose all over again, I would still choose to leave. Because in the end, I've learned that sometimes to find your own path, you have to be brave enough to lose everything. If my story has touched something in you, leave a comment below. Tell me about your own journey or what you're trying to overcome. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. Every like, comment, and subscription is the fuel that keeps me sharing stories that are real, deep, and filled with strength.